welcome back. Thank you so much for joining this session today. We are going to talk about the application process. I have this mini series going on within the podcast called Tips from a Recruiter. And I'm hoping that these tips are going to be helpful. I wanted to make sure we get into the first area, which are application tips. So, getting into it, applications have really evolved. I have tips when it comes to the application process that I think will be helpful and hopefully really effective. Now, this may be a topic that comes up again in the future because the application process is ever evolving. And what is true today, I actually will say was not so true maybe 5 years ago. Definitely from the time I started in my career till now, things have absolutely evolved. But with additions of things like AI, there's definitely going to be more more and more technology is added to the application process today more than it's ever been before. I will keep you posted on the evolution and how you can continue to stay prepared. But to get started, we're going to go with my first tip. And first tip is you're updated, you're keeping your resume updated. And what I mean by this is there is oftentimes when I have candidates who will apply. And actually, we'll get into this in a different section, but I do know that there are ways to work with different AI functions. I having AI help you apply to multiple roles. That's great, but it can become a problem if you're not using your AI partner effectively and really applying to the roles that are most suitable for your skills, for your background, for the direction you're trying to go into. I want to make sure that you all are being mindful of how the recruiting process happens when it comes to resumes. There seems to be a little bit of a misconception around recruitment and how recruiters review applications. Now, it depends on where you're applying to. It does depend on the kinds of roles you're applying to, of course. But for the most part, while software application tracking systems are really evolved in helping recruiters in many different ways these days, there haven't been application tracking systems that have taken over the full recruitment process in my experience. That may change in the future. So at this time, the bigger organizations that I've worked in, they do tend to utilize larger software. Applicant tracking systems can be optimized to allow for applicants to apply, but there may be some filters set up where, depending on how you answer the questions that are in the application, or depending on what kinds of minimum requirements are set up for that particular position, it may boot your application out. And you might not see that right away, but maybe you see that after 5 days of applying or after, a day of applying, you might get an automatic message saying that you're not eligible for the position. From my experience, this tends to happen with I said bigger organizations earlier, and that's because it's expensive to implement this kind of software, implement these kinds of tools. They are very much nice to haves, and they can decrease the amount of time spent on irrelevant applications, especially in bigger organizations that have hundreds of jobs that they are posting and hundreds of roles to fill, and maybe, um, only two recruiters trying to fill these roles or whatever it is. So these tools can be really effective, but they're not used everywhere. So there are plenty of employers who use applicant tracking systems and can do some filtering, but maybe not fully filter. Different job boards like Indeed or LinkedIn, they don't necessarily work the same way as an applicant tracking system. So they're not typically filtering resumes out or booting applications out, but it's just something that's really important to know and be aware of when you're applying to positions. And the reason why I say update your resume is because it's really important to keep your resume as tight and clean cut and concise as possible. And what I mean by that is if you can consolidate your experience down to a couple of pages, that is the ideal solution. And there is, there's different ideas about how to prepare your resume. Those who have a lot of experience, that shouldn't go unnoticed. And there's ways to update your resume to ensure that that happens. But having more than 2 pages in a resume makes it very unlikely for your resume to be fully reviewed. And what I mean by that is typically in a recruiting team, there are maybe 1 or 2 recruiters. In small companies, maybe it's an HR person who's also doing recruitment. And so the amount of applications that are submitted in a posting is extremely large, especially in today's world. Here in the US, it's a very competitive application process right now. Industries, in some industries, even more competitive than others. And so it's really important to be aware that recruiters are bombarded by applications and resumes more than ever before. And so a recruiter may be responsible for anywhere from 50 to 100 recs on their own. And in a small company, maybe not as many. Maybe they only have 25, 30, maybe only have, 10. So it just depends, but the scope of work that they're responsible for may be quite large. It might be end to end. Um, which means from the time a role is posted or received through the time of a new hire being in place 90 days. You never know what the recruiter is really responsible for. So the scope of work can be massive. And so, with all that being said, and kind of pointing out those little details, a recruiter does not, unfortunately, have the time to spend on reviewing resumes at their leisure. The average time a recruiter spends on a resume is typically 6 seconds. That is no time at all. So this means that the recruiter is really relying on that first page to give them all the information they need to review it and then move on. If they can't see the information they need within that first page, they're moving on. They're going on to the next application. They might be moving you out. So if you can't clearly convey that information within that first page of why you're eligible for that role or eligible to be moving forward in the application process compared to the thousand of other applicants. Because, yeah, that's what application pools look like these days. I have a couple of very active positions that I'm working on now. One of them has like 700 applicants. Another one has I think like almost 1,000. It's like 900. Now it depends. Again, it depends on the role. It depends on the role that you're applying to, the kind of position you're applying to. But more often than not, our applications are fairly full, and there's not a lot of time to review applicants as thoroughly as we'd like. We have to rely on the most relevant information that's available, depending on what the hiring manager is looking for, what the requirements of the job are, to really try to make sure that we're moving candidates through to the next stage. And so that can be very tricky. And so that's why I say really make sure that your resume is updated, your resume is consolidated, your resume is concise and clear to speaking to past experience, how relevant it is to the position today, and how it's going to get you into where you want to go. So that's the number one tip. The next tip in the application process, I would say, is to stay organized. I know that seems like such a basic tip, and what do you mean by that? But a lot of times, and this could be a really great way to get ChatGPT or even potentially Copilot involved, just different AI assistant tools, because today we're going to say that AI can really be your assistant. Um, keeping yourself on track with your applications. Really important to know what applications you've actually submitted. What roles did you apply to? What were the titles of the positions? What companies did you apply to? What are the dates? What are, if you have any interviews, what are the dates of your interviews? Really keeping track of all those details are going to be really important, because you never want to reply to a recruiter or a hiring manager and ask them, what position is this again? That's a horrible way to start out your experience with that company. And while I do think, for me personally, when candidates come back and ask that question, I really try my best to let it go and move things along. Because I know that as an applicant, you're applying to more than one job. You're applying to multiple roles. And of course, you're going to get, confused, especially if you have a lot of applicants. But I also have it in the back of my mind, is this person organized? I mean, if they're applying to that many jobs and you don't know what role I've followed up with them on, typically when I'm following up, or if I'm having a system follow up, it's pretty clear which role, even if it's had a common title, like for example, software engineer, that's a common title, or principal engineer, senior software engineer, whatever the title is might be common, but the company is going to be different. And so, to ask that question, it does not speak particularly well to your organizational skills. It doesn't reflect well on your ability to communicate in a professional way as well. So it's really important to be mindful about what message are you conveying when you're asking questions like that. You don't want to get to that place where you're asking a question like that. So, again, well, I say I might be a little bit more forgiving. Some places and some organizations and some recruiters are not going to be as forgiving. They're going to say, okay, well, this person clearly doesn't know what uh, my position is about. I got to move on because I have 999 other applicants to get through, unfortunately. So just keep that in mind. It's so important to stay organized during your application process. Okay, moving on to the next tip. Know the roles you apply to. So this is a little bit more specific from staying organized, but knowing the roles that you apply to really speaks on intentionality, especially if you're in a tight position and you're unemployed or you got laid off and you're really looking for um, roles. You might be wanting to apply to everything under the sun and really just whatever application moves me along. Well, that's a really good way to look at it. The more applications I get in there, the more likely I am to get followed up with. It could be true, but I would say, it may not be the best option for you to do that. And why I say that is because when you apply with intention, you're more likely going to be aligned to that position, which is going to be really key in moving your application along in the process. So know the roles you apply to requires you to really think about thoroughly, what is this position I'm applying to? And why do I want to apply to it? You may spend more time doing this, really looking at the details of the position, really looking at the minimum requirements, looking at the nice to haves that the position is requiring, looking a little bit more at the company. This allows you to really kind of have a bit more of an intimate relationship with the role in the position, and make sure that you're being very clear and intentional about what you're applying to. And you may still have a lot of applications that you do this with, but you may also reduce that number just a little bit because you're being more intentional about the roles that you're applying to. Why this might be more effective, what I said earlier about aligning to the role, when you align to roles a little bit more, likely you're going to see more activity on your end as far as uh, hiring managers or hiring teams or recruiters moving you forward in the application process. So that will equate to more screenings, and then potentially more interviews, and then potentially more second interviews, and hopefully multiple offers. And so the more that you get aligned to positions that you're applying to, the better you will see, or the more effective results you will have when it comes to moving yourself forward in the application process. And kind of speaking of this, maybe we need to get a little bit more in depth to aligning to the role. We can talk a lot. I have a lot to say on that. So there's a lot we can go into on that. And the next tip I have for you is apply right away. This also requires some intentionality. So there are a few ways for you to get notifications or reminders. You can do this by filtering your settings when you're looking for jobs in LinkedIn. And there are ways for you to get reminders about which positions you're interested in or most interested in. LinkedIn will remind you when new roles are posted. It will let you know when there are new available jobs that are meeting the filter requirements that you've set. That is a really effective way for you to look at roles and be available and be in the know about roles that are posted right when they're posted and that they're roles that you're interested in. When this happens, my recommendation would be to get on it and get in there and apply if you can. And the reason why I say this is typically because those application pools are so large, a lot of times the recruiter may not be able to keep the position posted as long as they'd like. We understand from a recruitment perspective, the longer we keep the position open and don't fill it, the poorer the candidate experience becomes. And so it's really important for the recruitment side to make sure a best practice would be for us to make sure that jobs are posted and then they're closed and filled as quickly as possible. So it's really important for us to move through these application pools quickly. But part of the strategy to do that is to get on the applicants right away and start to move candidates through the applicant tracking system or move them through the candidate pool as quickly as possible. And part of that is meaning that we're going to look at those pools right away and we're going to look at those candidates as soon as they're applying as well. And so if I open up a position on a Friday, which is typically recruiter best practice, to open up a position on Friday and let the weekend go because we know that most applications come through on a weekend and we want candidates who are potentially working and looking for jobs at the same time because we know that they're going to be the most active. We know that they might be the most qualified talent. And so we will typically post on a Friday and then look at the position again on a Monday just to see how that went. So anybody who's applied right in that beginning part of the candidate pool process, those candidates are more likely to be reviewed. It doesn't mean that your application will not be reviewed, but the ones that apply right in the beginning are higher likely to be reviewed within that first 50 to 100 applications that were received. And that's because a lot of times you can find your potential candidate within that first 50 to 100 in most positions. This isn't true for all, but this is true for a majority of positions. Now, there are going to be positions where it's just really difficult. We really need a specific person for this role. It's a hard to fill type of role. There's lots of candidates in the pool, but not all of them are going to be applicable. And so we need to really go through all the candidates. A lot of times recruiters will go through as many applications as they can, but they don't get to all of them. And so if they go through what they can and they find who they're moving forward with and they end up finding the right candidate and make an offer to, that means maybe they went through 100 candidates, but in total, there were 500 candidates in the pool, but they were able to find their candidate in that first 100. That means the other 400 candidates, 101 plus, were all still in the pool but didn't even get reviewed. And so that's why it's really important to apply right away. So that way you can be more likely to be in that first 50 to 100 candidates in the pool. All right. So those are my main tips for you today, just to recap and keep things concise for you. I'm going to go through the tips one more time. That is to update your resume, keeping it as close to 1 to 2 pages as possible. You're going to stay organized, keeping track of your applications, your dates, your positions, your interviews. You're going to know the roles that you apply to, which is really about intentionality and applying to what you most align to. And then you're going to apply right away. So keeping your filters on in the places that you find jobs and apply to jobs the most, and making sure that you're getting those notifications of when new roles are posted and you're applying to those right away. So I'm hoping that you use these tips and that you find them helpful and effective. And let me know. Let me know in the comments. Share with me. Tell me what tip you use the most. Tell me if there was anything here that helped you land an interview or move forward in the application process. I would love to hear about it. I'm hoping that these are things that are really going to push you through to that next stage. So let me know. Keep me posted. I love to hear everything that you share, and I love to hear about the things that you're experiencing in your application process, as well as your interview process and your work process as well. So feel free to share in the comments. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.